Welcome to Real Life with Jenny. My name's Jenny Senaparatna. Grab your favorite drink, get yourself a snack, and we will get started. Today, I have vanilla bean macaroon black tea. Honestly, it is so yummy, even without cream and sugar, but if you add it, it makes it even better. And I told you I was not decorating for Christmas. I don't even know what I'm talking about right now. I told you I wasn't decorating for Christmas, but I did. My daughter came home and woof, my house is full of Christmas. And so I have old-fashioned peanut brittle because that is one of my favorite Christmas snacks. So here we are. Let's get real. I wanted to talk about something that it's a trigger warning for some people. I'm going to be talking about cemeteries. So just so you know, I do not want anybody to be surprised. Normally I like to tell the story, but I did not want anybody to be surprised by that. So if you turn this off now, I will not be offended. I prayed a lot about this podcast before I did it, but here we are. So I was actually raised with cemeteries being a super positive place, being a very happy, joyful kind of situation, which seems like the opposite of what most people feel like when it comes to cemeteries. My great-grandmother Rose, who was the spunkiest, most she just went after life. She did not let things stop her. She was one of those people that 70 years ago was making enchiladas. She just was so incredibly creative and just inspiring. I actually named my daughter after her. My daughter's name is Samantha Rose, because my grandma Rose was a spitfire, and I knew that I wanted my daughter to have a little bit of that, to be someone that did not take convention and just went after things. She was a single mom of 5 for most of her life, and all of my life, and most of my mom's life. Actually, I think my great grandfather died before my mom was born. So she was just one of those people. But one of the things in her life, she taught me so many things. But one of the things was she believed that at a cemetery, you put flowers out for anyone that you could know. And not fake flowers. That was something she did not think was appropriate. My mom actually ran a company called the Silk Tree House and sold silk flowers for a living and made a lot of money at it. But we could not use those on the cemetery. And you had to keep them alive from May to September. That entire summer, you needed to keep them alive. So I remember my great-grandmother gave the job to my grandmother at a very young age. And there were many times my grandfather actually got locked, would shut his trunk and had the keys stuck in the trunk, and was stuck out there before cell phones, guys, and was stuck out at the cemetery. Because you needed to water them and prune them, and if they were dying, you need to bring new ones in, and it was a whole process. And I remember this process a lot as a child, and I would go out with my grandfather and my grandmother, and they would tell me stories of the people that we were putting flowers on and why we were honoring them, because I didn't know great grandfather or great uncle or and my grandfather and my grandmother would tell me stories of who these people were and what they did, and just share different things about them. And as my grandmother got older, her back got really bad, and so she wasn't able to walk very far, so she would sit inside the car and tell my grandfather what to do. It was so funny. And she would sit there and she'd be like, "Einard, move it that way. Nope, that's the wrong way. That one needs more water." And he'd bring the pots over to her and she'd fix them, and then he'd bring them back. And it was a whole thing. It was quite a production. It wasn't 1 or 2 people. It is a small town country cemetery in the middle of northern Minnesota. And no lights, no fancy things. And my grandmother would go, "Why is there not a bench here? There should be a bench." And then my grandparents passed away. And my mom's an only child, so it went to my mom to be in charge of this. And I am the oldest, so thus it is also my job to do this. And I remember my mom was like, "Why isn't there a bench out here?" And I'm telling you, if Jesus doesn't come back before my mom goes to heaven, I hope to be able to afford a bench to put out there and have a bench for people to be able to sit at that cemetery. But I grew up knowing that the cemetery was a place of celebration. It was a place that you go and you hear stories about people that you don't normally get to hear stories about. And you go, wow, these people were such an influence in my life because they were an influence in my mom's life, and they were an influence in my grandparents' life, and they were an influence in my great-grandmother's life. And so they influenced my life. So cemeteries were always a super positive, really fun place for me. It was just like, I kind of knew the cemetery like the back of my hand. Like, honestly, even today, I could walk through there and kind of tell you who's related to who and stories of people that I'm not even related to, and know the layout really well because I spent so much time there. And so when my grandparents passed away, my daughter was 2 years old. So that was 16 or 17 years ago. And I had friends that didn't come to the funeral because they were afraid of funerals. They had never been to a funeral. They were some of my closest friends, but they were like, that was something that was really scary and not something they'd ever dealt with. And they were definitely not going to come to the cemetery with me because that's a place that's, all the crazy stuff that you see on TV is what, their thoughts of that. And so I decided with my daughter at about 2 that I was going to make sure that the cemetery was the same kind of place for her that it was for me. Now, not necessarily that I have been able to continue putting live flowers on the cemetery. Like confession time, have not been able to do that for years because we no longer have a home up there. So I'm not up there every weekend or every other weekend. So keeping flowers alive or even putting them on is not something I'm able to do. So it stopped with my generation. Totally my fault. Yes. Fail. All right, let's all mark it down and realize that's just the way things are, but it's okay. I've let it go. I don't have a house up there. I don't live up there, and it's pretty far, guys. So it's okay. But when Sam was 4, 5, 6, something in that area, my husband thought I was crazy. Like, I remember going, I'm going to take Sam out to the cemetery, and he was like, you're going to do what? And it wasn't necessarily because I was taking her to the cemetery. It was because I was going to take her out around 10 or 11 o'clock at night because I wanted her to be able to see the stars like you cannot see the stars anywhere else because there's no lights. It's in the middle of miles and miles of nothing around it, and they do not have lights. And so I brought a blanket and had some mittens because it was, I think, in the fall or in early spring. I think there was a little bit of like powder on the ground, snow, but I'm not 100% sure. And it was really cold. And I put a blanket out and we laid down and we looked up at the stars that you cannot see that many stars anywhere else. I'm just convinced. It was just absolutely gorgeous. And that night there were fireflies all around in the trees outside of the cemetery. So there's like a plot that has been cleared and then there's woods all the way around it. And there were fireflies all over in the woods. Just like almost like sparkly lights had been put throughout the entire place. And there were deer, and it was just so fun. Even to this day, I know she said it's one of her core memories that she remembers laying out there and it just being so peaceful and fun and such an adventure with her mom. And then we started traveling. Like, we travel for a living. And I just love history. It's something that I really enjoy. I've kind of hidden it for years. I didn't want people to think I was nerdy. But I guess that's just out now, right? But I love the history of a cemetery because for me, it was all the stories and the people and who's related to who in the cemetery. And, because I have Jensen's on one side and Jensen's on the other side, but they're not actually related, but they are, like, it's a whole thing. And I just remember that kind of intrigues me. So when we started traveling, we would go get a donut or a treat somewhere and then let Sam go and play with her goodies, and we'd go and we'd look around the cemetery and we'd look at the ones that were really old and some have gates around them, and we'd talk about them, and we just made it an adventure. So every time on most of our vacations when she was little, even to this day, like, it has always been an adventure. In fact, when we went back to Sri Lanka, we went to go see where Kevin's grandfather had been buried because we weren't able to make it back for this what is it called? Funeral. Oh my goodness gracious, Jenny. Okay, here we go. This is Real Life with Jenny, by the way. We weren't able to make it back for the funeral. We actually came back like 6 months later. And so Kevin and all of his cousins, well, some of the cousin girls, not all of them got to come, but some of us went and we were walking around and looking at things. And Sam was just really enjoying herself. And I think the cousins were a little like, oh, wow, this is interesting that she's not. And I'm like, no, this is what we do. Like, we go to cemeteries and we look around and we see who's related to who. And, in Sri Lanka, it's a little bit different. They do things much differently than we do. But we're not getting into that today. But it was just, that is the way I raised her. I really was super intentional about making sure that it was a place of celebration. In fact, when our first dog died, Ty, she was in 3rd or 4th grade. I'm not sure. And my grandparents had just passed away like 2 years before that. And so behind their stone, we dug a little hole and we put his ashes in a bone. So she had a place to go back to and celebrate and remember who he was. And that is something that I was like, oh, this seems illegal. And it might have been, I don't know. But But I wanted her to have a place that she could go back to and remember. Just like in the Bible, they did that when they crossed the Jordan. They put up rocks and had a place of, here's what God did. And so my thought with this today was not necessarily that you need to be comfortable with cemeteries or funerals. That's not necessarily it. Because mourning is something that's real. And it takes a time to get to the celebration space after someone passes away. Be very real there. Like, I am not an expert at this at all, but I knew that I wanted a cemetery to be a place that she felt comfortable. And I think there are things in our lives that we think we should be comfortable with that we're not. That we're like, I really want to be comfortable standing in front of people and speaking at my board meeting or at a meeting at work, or I want to be comfortable with my finances, or I want to, there's so many things that we're uncomfortable with. And what I wanted to remind you is that you have to be intentional to get there. You don't just happen to be good at speaking in front of people. That's not necessarily a natural thing for a lot of people. It's something you have to work at. It's something that you have to study. It's something that you have to figure out how to do. You have to be intentional on how to get there. Does that make sense? When you're looking at your kids and you're like, what fear do they have and how can we remove it? You have to be intentional on how to get them to the place that they're no longer afraid that there's a monster living under their bed. Like, how do you get them to that point? You have to be intentional. And we forget about that as adults. Like, we have fears and we have anxieties that kind of rule who we are. And I think that the verse that says, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind is so important as an adult because we sometimes need to be more intentional on the things that we're fearful of and how to conquer them. And I just thought that's what God has been kind of laying on my heart, Jenny. What are you fearful of, and how can we overcome those fears by putting a sound mind and being intentional about it? And allowing God to come into those spaces and be king over those spaces. It doesn't mean that the fear and anxiety is going to go away all at once, but we can work towards that goal if we are intentional about it, and if we put scripture with it, and we talk to people, and we learn things, and we practice, and we go after what we're afraid of, and we're intentional. So that's my encouragement to you this week. What is holding you back? What is the fear that is holding you back? And how can you put a sound mind to it and be like, you know what, this isn't logical. I can do that, right? I can be intentional. A millionaire does not become a millionaire overnight. They work at it. They have a goal and they go after it. And I really think that all of us who are listening to this podcast or speaking this podcast, if we're intentional, we can do mighty things for God. We can have things not hold us back, and we can go after it. Sometimes you just need to take a breath and figure out how to be intentional about that area. Well, that's all I have for you this week. Boy, it felt a little heavy, but that's okay. It's going to be a great week. We're all going to be okay. You can go to Real Life with Jenny on Instagram and on Facebook. You can also support this podcast by going to buymeacoffee.com/Real Life with Jenny. You can go to reallifewithjenny.com or christconnection.cc/Jen. All of my information is there. Tried to do that a little bit faster this week because that seems to be a really drawn out, long situation normally. And I'm like, how can I make that quicker? See, I'm trying to be intentional, guys. I'm working on being intentional and fixing the things that I don't feel like I'm doing well. And that is really what it's all about. What areas are you like, boy, I am not doing well at that? And making a plan on how to be intentional and change that area. And I just think I did that so well in so many areas as Sam was growing up. There were things that I felt that were valuable that I wanted her to learn, and I was intentional about her learning those things. And then now I'm an adult, and I'm like, oh, wait, I need to have that same practice in my life. That I just go, I'm going to go after it. You know what? I really want to be a speaker, so I need to work on that. I need to work on how to be better at that, how to communicate what I want to do better, and maybe, I got so many things there. We're not even going to go into that. But God knows, and I am going to be intentional and follow Him and have a sound mind and not live by fear. You all have a great week.